Before Hurricane Andrew in 1992, Florida had the worst building codes in the country. That disaster showed them that they could have saved 1/3 of the damage with building codes, and they have the best building codes today. They've actually changed their building codes. And it'd be interesting, on Pennsylvania, obviously there are challenges in every place for that, but if you can couple the economic incentives with the notion that a building code is really an important way to at least show that your structure, the property value may go up, there are a variety of things that you can show might be beneficial. These might be the following principle. Unless your factory was well designed, had sprinklers, had bed lands and whatnot, we're not going to issue an insurance policy to give you essentially the protection. And so if one can tie the notion of good sprinkler systems to an insurance policy that will protect you against the loss and show the two can be coupled, that may be one way. We're arguing for more connections between prepared.
One moment. If it wasn't for Congressman Barletta and the approach that we've had from the national level, we would have never been able to develop the relationships and move for immediate relief for Pennsylvania families that were going to be dramatically affected by the insurance increases that would have come without the ability for us to have this sort of 5-year reprieve for planning and the ability for us to take some liability that are going to exist along these communities that have been there for decades. I'm anxious to get into the discussion about what we can actually do proactively to make sure we're reducing those insurance premiums, having a larger plan to be able to invest in real many
community to actually reduce these losses, both at the level of the individual property owner, but more at the level of the community of the state of Florida. And it seems to me for this discussion today, it would be very, very interesting to talk about the possibility of a community in Pennsylvania being.
First, you need to have awareness. You need to understand your risk at a level of detail that will allow you to make good choices. Not just, I know we're prone to flooding, but what kind of flooding, to what extent, how often. So the real analysis needed to make good choices, right, to build the base for good choices. The next thing I think you need, after a three-pronged approach, is you need to have planning, being bold and proactive, to saying, how do we take control of this situation and manage it over time, and increase the time horizon from, one budget cycle to a multi-year time horizon that you typically do with larger, complicated capital projects.
So I would like to add to that. We talk about risk, and risk. We have to identify them first, and then make sure we invite them also, because what was missing was Amtrak, right? If we had Ebola, what's missing? The hospitals and the risk, the people at risk, not educating them to let them know that more people die from the flu than Ebola. So it's a big education piece. And with the use of technology now, we should they go out every week during hurricane season? We have to figure out how do we get the information out prior to, rather than wait until.
I know this roundtable is talking about solutions, and if you want to have people pay attention to what's going on before a disaster, you figure out a way to put a structure and an incentive to do so. I mean, we're talking about all this money that happens post-disaster, what it means for recovery. A planning, a reduction in premiums, and a larger picture of partnerships that really exist between the state government, FEMA, and local municipalities to be able to address in a priority way what areas of diversion are possible and how we're going to be able to make those investments prior to the next natural disaster. So my suggestion is to really talk, and we've done it because we want to have this incentive rather than it being an emergency where we're now out of time and facing the next natural disaster.
I think those are all really good points, and I think it's interesting to take kind of a step back from this discussion and realize that we're having a person to say things in your house. Why don't you, like once a day, get a couple granola bars and throw them in a bag, and so make it easier for folks. I think we overwhelmed them by saying solve world peace, right? To be prepared, as opposed to every day do a little bit.
Without water. Well, so we're engaged from an emergency management perspective, trying to see what we can do to get water. And I said, well, let's call the Super Walmart up there. How are they doing? Well, they were out of water for a short period of time, but they enacted their emergency response, and they had truckloads coming in. The point I'm making is that, and I think Marion hit on the head, in addition to those little things, if we engage that public and incentivize that public, because from the private sector, they do have incentive. It's a business, they need to. And Mr. If you'd be able to talk about the infamous concept of insurance.
Kind of change with the consequences that are being proposed with insurance premium change, unless we're really understanding what the impact's going to be directly to individuals who run school districts, who run municipalities, and I'm taking this again, not from the individual planning perspective, but from a government planning perspective, unless you're up against those significant consequences that are going to have a dramatic effect.
Not just, but the opportunity to have that chance to step back and think more strategically. Because if we only live moment to moment, we're going to continue to collectively make bad choices. Does that make sense?
Yes,
and I think that's, yeah, so I think we're actually in agreement. I think maybe I was not clear. They're not mutually exclusive.
And standards. And that comes back to the Amtrak question you raised and the Ebola and the other aspects. How do we actually make sure that the regulations, and building codes are obviously an important part of that, are actually enforced? And then the last point, as a general point, is can we find some good case studies of where we've had successes? And maybe there's something in Dauphin County or in Pennsylvania one could use, that it's worked.
So we can engage the community leaders as the focal point to get the message out. I think we can be sure.
Well, Fire Chief, if I could push you just on that point, I'm a former cop and a current politician, and cops and politicians are hated, but everyone loves firefighters.
Our homes tomorrow. And as a result, we're not sure we want to necessarily have investment in protective measures because the price of the home is going to go way up. Rather than trying to show that there are ways for that price to stay at a reasonable level if you could tie it in with insurance. So I want to sort of amplify just the stakeholder idea. I think is really critical. Getting
We offering what incentives are we creating in the environment? We all have a shared responsibility to either
The benefit directly as a result of it.
I should mention to you that Lynn County is and Cedar Rapids is one of the resilient communities.
And Linda Langston from there is a good friend.
Because of exactly what you're saying. But I'd be very interested in knowing how the real estate community reacted when you had them at the table to some of the questions that are being pointed. Could they see the importance of preparedness?